Okay, we're a little bit late today, but we have made it. Welcome to episode 24 of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager, VP of Research and Development at Sumer Sports. I'm joined by the CEO of Sumer Sports, Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, you've been in this, time of year before. NFC, a couple NFC championship games. You were also, you obviously had Super Bowl wins when you were with the Patriots, and I think that is also reflected in the contrast between how us two men look. You have a nice collared shirt that, pristine, pressed nicely, your hair immaculate. Me, on the other hand, and now I just put on this sort of thin sweatshirt, but then my hair is also just an absolute sight to behold. We had just got done with probably it was a 3-hour meeting talking about design and all that good stuff. And, you, a veteran of such things, are no worse for the wear. Me, on the other hand, looks a little disheveled, if you will.
Look, it was a mind-bending day at so many levels. And the last, how many hours was it? I can't even put a calculation on it. What did you say, 2.5 hours?
Yeah, it was 2 hours and 45 minutes. I think we got, and the other part that was interesting of it, and this is to anybody who's, obviously thinking about working for a startup or anything of that sort, that was scheduled today. I had, here's a little bit that goes into my life. I have a call on, I have a Kansas City radio station that I've been doing a call with an hour a week for the last 6 years. And that was a certain time. I had to call them and be like, hey, more important things are happening. Can I get off a segment early? I also had another call, and this goes to my ignorance or my naivete, if you will. But I had another call with a station called BetQL to talk about the games and point spreads and all that was supposed to start when our meeting was supposed to end. And of course, then that didn't happen because we continued to move forward. And so I had just push that back, leave, come back. And so, yeah, we've been context switching all day, Thomas, and that's of course, par for the course for a startup like ours.
Well, look, you can never totally prepare back to startup. This is new for both of us. Well, you had some semblance of it at PFF, right? Maybe a little different. I'm growing up in a business that is very compartmentalized, right? Very controlled, and come hell or high water, we're not changing. Usually not changing. Meetings on the fly. We're not doing what you just said normally, right? It wouldn't work. You don't have a head coach that would be able to do that, or a GM. Here we are, we're doing it. We have a very, very strong leader and founder and chairman and PTJ, Paul Tudor Jones, who is outrageously successful in the business world. And ultimately we come together, and when we have time to be with Paul, we relish the time. It's busy. And there's back to mind-bending. There's mind-bending conversation. And I hope he's listening right now, because the way that we approach this as a startup and the way that we continue to banter and talk about things all the way down to the minutia of design in our product is something that is beyond fathomable, quite honestly. It's a really interesting thing. And now let me add this. This happens to be the first show that we've ever done internationally. So you'll all get a kick out of this. On the fly recently, my wife, I told my wife I was going to be with her on her father's birthday and such, and be together. And I said, I will travel with you to Montego Bay. So today I literally traveled to Montego Bay, but all these meetings were going on. I swear to God, we had a meeting that was another meeting that was called for design on another level. And I literally listened in and participated via text on the plane on the way down from, across the ocean to Jamaica. And then I get here, and then we have to do this mind-bending, unbelievable discussion that we're having. So, man, bear with me, everyone, tonight. I'm gonna be able to share as I can share. And yet it's just a great sort of example of, it's not easy to be in a startup. You have to be agile and adaptable. I would say that same thing about being a football person, a football, data scientist in football, because you have to deal with GMs and head coaches, and we can be pains in the asses, and it just happens. You have to work with it. So that's my rant a little bit. I'm recovering a little bit because I've had a few. my wife Mimi's brought in a few plates of local shrimp and local whatever here. So I'm getting my energy back. You remember when I texted you about an hour ago, I'm like,
Yes.
dude, I need to eat or I am not going to be able to function.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, man, I once did, my sister got married in Budapest in April. That was the only time I ever did my last podcast internationally. And of course, Budapest is 6 hours ahead of where we are. So it was, I was doing all my content in the middle of the night back then, which was something. And then, this is an international. We've gone now. This podcast, for 24 episodes in. I mean, you've done it from Florida. That was where you were Monday. Obviously, your place in Atlanta. I did one from Utah, one from Lincoln, Nebraska, one from Minnesota, or a bunch from Minnesota over break.
I was in Boulder, Colorado for a number of different ones, kind of back and forth. Yeah, we have to be adaptable. I love it. And thanks for.
And we actually got a suggestion here from Amber Gribbins. If you set up Slaptop on your home computer, Mr. Dimitroff, you will get better video coverages from the plane if the Wi-Fi is slow. You can log in from your home computer. It goes at home speed.
Good.
Wow. So we're gonna have to archive that one from Amber. We really appreciate you, and we really appreciate everybody who has come to listen to the show and who continues to be a loyal listener for everybody here. We got Frazier coming in. This is not generally a show where we're going to go ahead and preview games, but because of the nature of it, where we are at the Final Four of this NFL season, I do think it's something that we should do, just looking at the teams from how they've been built and using your expertise, Thomas, as well as mine, to sort of talk about these two teams and how they got here. The first thing that I want to do, though, and the last thing that we'll do that's not related to the topic of the show, is announce that we at Sumer Sports are sponsoring the Sloan Sports Analytics Conferences this March, and we are also 5 of us will be part of the mentorship program. And everybody who knows me well knows that's near and dear to my heart. And I think that the only way that we can continue to grow the discipline and get people who are underrepresented and kind of grow the space both wide and deep, you need to have great mentors, and we are putting our money where our mouth is at Sumer there. So that's just an announcement. If any of you are going, obviously hit us up on Twitter, hit us up through email, and if you're not, still hit us up through email, hit us up through Twitter. It might take us a while to get to you, but I sure love to give advice to people who are trying to break into the business. And like I said, we at Sumer Sports are putting our money where our mouth is there. I have been told I've not done an outside outing with Thomas Dimitroff before. I have been told, though, that I need to go get fitted for a suit, because if I do not, I am going to look like a fish out of water next to the former Falcons GM and all of his great attire.
Well, look, I do want to say to that point, I'm sure you'll pull it off, just like our buddy, Sean Clement's he's ahead of you on it a little bit, meaning right. He's already gone out and pulled some threads. It's funny because someone had mentioned, go out there and get some golf shirts. And this funny thing about me style-wise is I'm not a logo golf shirt person, except for this, right? So this is I'm saying like a business logo, only because I think it can be overplayed. I won't get into the whole bunch of that. I'm glad you guys are going in there. You do whatever you need to do. Show your style. I think it's a good thing. Let me just, before we go any further on it, Sloan, Daryl Morey, and Jessica Gelman. Jessica's a good friend of mine. I really appreciate working with them on this. And this is going to be, to me, a really, really important contribution that Sumer Sports makes to the Sloan, to Sloan and the conference. And we're excited about what we're doing. We'll have, again, we'll be at the VIP event, of course, but there are other things that you guys are doing, from the academic side that I think is going to be just vital for what we're doing. We're really proud of being able to do what we're doing coming in there. So thank you, Jessica, for being on our side on it, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And Sean and I will be doing one of the workshops. If you're going to want to come and learn a little bit about football analytics, Sean Clement and I will be, I think Paul Saban as well. Some combination of us will be teaching a course there, going back a little bit to my roots. Speaking of roots, let's look at how all of these teams have grown up, right? Because we have, let's start with the NFC. We have the San Francisco 49ers traveling to Philadelphia to face the Eagles. Eagles, one of the more, I would say, impressive franchises over the past few years, despite having to stop and start with the quarterback. and the head coach. The 49ers, though, a team, there's a lot of continuity there, right? Since 2017, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have been the head coach, general manager duo. They traded a second-round pick to your former team, the New England Patriots, for Jimmy Garoppolo to be their quarterback. He was able to guide them to 1 Super Bowl and 2 NFC championship games. But despite that, they traded 3 first-round picks to move up in the 2021 draft to select Trey Lance out of North Dakota State. That has so far not worked. But I think it speaks to the resiliency of the roster that they've built, that they continue to be in this position, right? Think about that. They trade a bunch of draft picks to move up and get Trey Lance. Since that trade, they've made 2 consecutive NFC championship games, and they've had 2 different starting quarterbacks in both games. Neither one of them is Trey Lance. And so you think about that, Thomas. Obviously a lot of that is Kyle Shanahan, a guy you work with closely in Atlanta as the offensive coordinator, who's a brilliant, I think, play caller and designer. Part of that is John Lynch, a guy who has, made the top draft picks he's had, other than Lance, count, and just kind of a very rock steady roster that I think is one of the pillars of the league.
Okay, so I'm going to provide a backdrop for everyone because many people probably aren't privy to some of this information. I think it'll be good. You lead in and you can tee me up a little bit more on this because I think it's really important to set the tone. You already talked about it. They have Kyle Shanahan, obviously, as the head coach, who's got roots from the bottom of his world, being with his dad and being genius-like at what he knows, and he does an unbelievable job with that. And then you have John Lynch, who is a Hall of Fame player, who, as everyone knows, comes into that fold with Kyle Shanahan to partner as a head coach and a GM. By the way, is vital to build a team. If you do not have an operational, communicative relationship, you have no chance whatsoever. Do not listen to anyone out there. And there's been a couple executives out there that say, no, man, I promote contentious relationships. Bullshit. You cannot function successfully without having that. These 2 men come together, really, really good knowledge in their worlds. I'm talking about Kyle and I'm talking about John Lynch. John Lynch comes over, remember, as a GM from the media. And I mentioned to John, we did a podcast about a year and a half ago, whenever it was. And I was saying to him, I said, do you understand that how many people in the scouting world, the management world, were jealous and weren't really sure how they wanted things to work out with you? I said this to John. Think about that, everyone. When someone pops over from the media, albeit a Hall of Fame player, people are they just don't, in this world, they don't like that, right? They don't accept it because they feel like it tugs at the very fabric of what they've been doing for 15, 20, 30 years to get to a GM role. And John gets in and is successful. Pull aside maybe the lack of scouting on the road experience. He has the right people around him. Adam Peters, his assistant GM. He had Rand Carthon, who left, as you know, recently to go to Tennessee. Good, solid, surrounding people. Just so everyone knows, in the backdrop of this, they understand through and through the system that Kyle Shanahan wants. Kyle's very direct. Kyle's very knowledgeable. They come together and they learn their system together and they build together and they have visions together. And, again, with really, really good background football minds, and their egos aren't getting in the way because, quite honestly, let's call it the way it is. Kyle Shanahan could come in with a massive ego. So could John Lynch, but they both respect each other enough that they can really dig in on the building process, which is vital, which leads into what you're talking about. When you're putting the team together, you're deciding on the players, you're deciding on the format, you're deciding on how you're going to move through your trades. And you as GM and head coach, these 2 guys have a strong vision together. And Bill Belichick always said this, and I might have said it before, and I hate to repeat myself, Thomas, this is when I first got the job. You know your team better than anyone. The media can pop off, the fan base can pop off, but you know it better than anyone. I'm talking about the head coach and the GM. If you are communicative enough with a common vision, all you up and coming executives, I'm telling you, get on the wavelength with your head coach. Even if you're different personalities, working in the same direction, always communicating, being able to share. I'll leave it on this and I'm going to toss it back to you. being able to share and understand that candor is key. If you can't be candid with your partner in the whole thing, i.e. GM head coach, you have no chance of being successful. And so I just think they've done such a really good job. Big picture, I just wanted to share that where they are, where Kyle and John are.
Well, yeah, and the interesting thing is there have been rocky roads, right? Like 2017, they only won one of their first like 10 or 11 games. They get Garoppolo, they win the first, they win the last 5 games of that season. But then 2018, he tears his ACL in week 3. They have another season where there wasn't much going for them. 2019 happens, and obviously they make a Super Bowl, but there was a come from behind win by Kansas City, another team that we'll talk about today. 2020 was another season with 10 or more losses, right, where Garoppolo gets hurt and things. And you look at Shanahan, his the two of their records, right, were not great the first like 3-4 years of the tenure. And in fact, even last year they started 3-5, if I'm not mistaken, before really growing up. And I think that continuity, that bandedness, banding together, and also the system they built. So you talk about Rand Carthon, like Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was there. Parag Maratha, he's still there. A very and then you look at the coaching staff. Robert Saleh's a head coach. He was the defensive coordinator there. Now he goes, and not to say that Saleh didn't add value, but he goes. And D'Amico Ryans comes in, and it's seamless, more or less there. Mike McDaniel leaves. He goes and has a great coaching debut with the Dolphins, even though Tua was hurt. And, their offense still is humming. And you look and you say, okay, this is an organism where, branches get cut off and they produce fruit somewhere else. And the thing still builds. And I think that there's an element there where, you really have, a great football team, and you look and they've taken advantage of all the seasons that they've gone through, right? So 2018 happens and they struggle. Their quarterback gets hurt. Well, what was interesting was they structured Jimmy Garoppolo's contract so that was the biggest cap hit that they were going to have while he was their quarterback. And so then he comes back. They get the second overall pick because of the struggles of the 2018 team. They get Nick Bosa, premium position player. Now he's basically the favorite to be defensive player of the year. So like every single season of their life, right, with the ups, they've been able to obviously capitalize and make the NFC title game every one of their good years. And then the downs, they go ahead and get players like Mike McGlinchey and Nick Bosa, guys that are bedrock members of their team. And they, Joe Staley retires. They go get Trent Williams. Like this is a team where, they just kind of reinforce it. And the biggest edge that they have, and I want to turn this over to you because you have a similar experience. The biggest edge that they have is really their quarterback is their coach, which, he's the mind. He's the guy that pushes that whole offense. And a lot of it is similar to your experience in that he grew up in football, right? His dad, Mike, was, the head coach of the Raiders and then the head coach of the Broncos and the offensive coordinator the last time the Niners won a Super Bowl back in 1994. And you think about, you similarly grew up in football. It sort of was your lifeblood. And like you as you get older and you start to be able to run things yourself, there's aspects of how you've seen it run before. And that can be, as somebody who wasn't, like I played football growing up, but like my family's not a football family. Like what are the advantages you get if you're somebody like Shanahan in that realm?
Well, I could speak to it from the standpoint of when I got that GM job. One of my pitch points to Arthur Blank at the time is I've literally done every role in an organization, from, again, picking up sweats and jocks and whatever else I did, and tape, working in all rooms, doing whatever needed to be done to see how the organization was running. And I take a lot of pride in that. I mean, even back to those days when people were talking about me cutting the grass, because I literally did work on the grounds crew with the Browns. I think bigger picture, that is a really, really important thing. You go back to Kyle Shanahan. Not only was he in rooms with his father, who was genius, like in his own right, of course, right? Yep. I mean, one of the very best. And he was able to watch him. He was able to watch how he functioned. He was able to watch how he put game plans together. So when I personally was working with Kyle Shanahan, when he was with us at the Falcons, he had such a well-rounded view of a football team. Remember, he was going through a little bit of a time there, whether he was going to get his opportunity to be an HC or not, right? He had a couple, he was at loggerheads with a couple former assistant GMs, I believe, that were there. We won't get into that whole banter, but he came out of that from our place, I feel, in a really good space. And what I noticed, this is really interesting because I felt it in my own way, and I say this completely humbly. He comes out of it as a coordinator into a head job, and it's like the head job was even that much better for him because he didn't have to worry about all the other stuff. He was made to be a head coach. When you're coming up and you're sort of stifled a little bit, and there's another step there, you get distracted, you get edgy, you might want to argue with people. I think he's in his own world in a good place right now because he knows he's the one that's calling the shots, of course, along with John. But a really, really important thing for him. And I will say, I just continue to be impressed. And then look, bring it back to 16 when he was our O coordinator. That was a really, really tough run, kick, banter forever. I mean, that's not easy to get over that. That cat stood up. We talked about it with another situation we were talking about recently about another thing close to us. When someone gets drilled, and that they come out on the other side, standing up tall, understanding that that's what they have to be, resilient. And I think he's done a great job with that. And now, anytime anyone wants to throw darts, they could even throw some darts at him over the last few years they got in the playoffs, right? Why they came up short. But you know what? He has a lot of confidence. I want to finish with this. Of course, a ton of confidence. And he's got resiliency about him. I love that about him. I think personality-wise, and remember this, take it to wherever you want to take it. All of us, in our own ways, some have been at much more successful fathers in football, and others have been in football coaches, sons of football coaches, and sons of personnel people. There's this bond that you have, and at the core, at the very core, when you're around it, like at a serious level, and you know it inside out, you really will go toe-to-toe with anyone as far as being the domain expert. So a little aside, when you don't get the domain expert appreciation, you get a little bit edgy. Like, why are you not tapping into that? That's as a GM, that's as a coach, and quite honestly, it's from a business perspective.
Right.
It's really
when I was an academic, I got that a lot when I did consulting in biology and marketing and everything, and absolutely, you learn over time that those people, you have to let them talk first, and that is a hard lesson to learn, but you learn it obviously, in the school of hard knocks, right? Which football, I think, is the school of hard knocks more than anything. I think that you bring up and what's cool, and before we move on to the Eagles here, Mike Shanahan, he got probably a head coaching job too early and struggled with the Los Angeles Raiders. This is how long ago, Los Angeles Raiders. And, things didn't work out the best. Then he goes, and much like his son, he was an offensive coordinator for one of the best teams to ever play, right? The 94 Niners, Steve Young, Ricky Waters, Jerry Rice on the other side. And they were amazing. And to your point, like, that was the right kind of like, okay, now I'm ready. Goes to Denver, and Denver's immediately good, right? Denver's immediately good. They go win 2 Super Bowls. So he gets his day in the sun, and your son's watching all of the nooks and crannies of what can happen as that coach. Failure, success, and then back with Denver again. You're going to Super Bowl, or you're going to AFC title games with Jake Plummer, who's now selling mushrooms in Colorado. Then you have you see it all, right? And so everybody's like, well, how is Kyle Shanahan going to respond to having Brock Purdy, a 7th round pick, as his quarterback? It's like, he's seen it all. Like, we know what's going to happen here, and so I think that and as somebody who doesn't have that background, I admire being able to be up and close to seeing all of those things, because I think your resolve when you go through adversity, and this Niners team has gone through adversity. They've had 3 great years with these two, and they've had 3 not so great years with these two, and they come out of the wash, and I think that they're not favored. They have the lowest odds to win the Super Bowl per the betting markets, but even I think that they're here to stay. I'll just say that.
To your point, and those are all really good points. Back to finish up with Kyle. I mean, personally, I think he's done one of the best jobs that this is quintessential, Kyle Shanahan, right? Put a quarterback in there, see what he sees, put him in the right spot, everything that goes on. I just think it's been a marvelous job that he's done that way. And I will say this is for This is for bulletin board material. Sumer Sports. You make sure you put this out on YouTube. I believe that Kyle Shanahan, as he's evolving as a head coach, is one of those head coaches that you seriously have to look at if you were another organization to trade for him as your head coach.
Make the Niners turn down 2 first-round picks. That's all I say. Make the other GM make a tough decision to keep him. That's a good one. Speaking of kind of ups and downs, and this is what this is another team where I look at it, and I'll be honest with you. I got one of my former interns, Zach Drapkin, is an analyst for the Eagles. So like I root, I'm much like you, although my tree is not as nearly as big as yours. You probably have to root for somebody on every team. But like I have a little piece of my heart with the Eagles just because, of his success there. But I look at this team in Philadelphia and I think, okay, you had Howie Roseman. By the way, Howie Roseman's son was in my class at Wharton, so that was kind of cool. Where I was like, so they're a family, by the way, that's interested in the stuff that we care about in analytics, and you look at how they've constructed their their team, where Norman Brayman and all those guys sold it to Jeffrey Lurie in the 90s. They had their ups and downs. They get Andy Reid in the fold. We're talking about Andy Reid in a little bit. Andy Reid, of course, 4 straight NFC title games, 1 Super Bowl appearance. They have another NFC title game in 2008. It kind of goes a little bit poorly for them. They get on the horse with Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly shows, much like, in a Shanahanian way, a little bit differently, of course, but in a Shanahanian way, they go playoffs with Nick Foles, 10-6 with Mark Sanchez, and that the power sort of gets ceded over to Chip Kelly a little bit. And then the roster kind of atrophies because, as you'll say, I think more than even I will say, once a brilliant head coach does not necessarily give rise to a brilliant team builder, and so that it kind of got a little bit rough there. Chip Kelly gets fired after a 6-9 start to the 2015 season. They give more power, to Roseman. A couple years later, they're in the Super Bowl, win the Super Bowl against the Patriots. That's amazing. But then they get at a crossroads again, right, where Carson Wentz is not working out, and Doug Peterson is sort of, the message had grown stale there. And I think this rebuild here is one of the more impressive things ever. They go Jalen Hurts out of Alabama in the second round. They take a year. They take Nick Sirianni. Sirianni develops a run-first kind of offense. Defense is almost no talent in 2021, and yet they still make the playoffs because they had an easy schedule. And then this offseason, they decide we're going to get some players. And they go James Bradbury. They go, they traded for Robert Quinn midseason. They get Hassan Reddick, former Temple Owl. And of course, they trade a first-round pick for A.J. Brown, and now they're here, right? They're here at a 14-3 record, if I'm not mistaken, and they're 2.5-point favorites in this game. I look at the Eagles, and I think they're a model. They're a model franchise for how we should be doing this thing in the NFL, and yet it's not necessarily, a lot of times what we hold as the pinnacle for, how to run things. It's always survivorship bias. It's always like, oh, well, this group got a bunch of good lucky things happen to them, and now they're this way. And yet I just went through a bunch of stuff that went wrong for the Eagles, and yet they're still here today, preparing for an NFC title game.
Well, look, it comes back to, it starts at the top, right? I think the relationship that Howie has with Jeffrey Lurie is vital. And I think they work together really, really well. They understand each other really well. They've been through their ups and downs, of course, when Chip Kelly was there, and our guy Howie continued to hold on. Again, Howie is I think he was the executive of the year this year as well. I think he's the favorite, but he's been executive of the year before. Yeah.
Of
course he has, and he's just. I want to come back to this because I've said this before. Howie has a really good grasp of what's around him. As you all know, Howie was more like Mickey Loomis coming into the football side and the evaluation and the GM side from the business side, or he was from the legal side. Mickey Loomis down in New Orleans came in from the business side. They developed well. They learned well. I mean, Howie, to his credit, continued to learn football the way that he wanted to. Little aside, his son that you're talking about, another son, a younger son, I can't remember exactly which son it was. He he's fascinated with scouting and wants to be his dad. And that's always a cool thing, right? He doesn't just want to like reap the benefits of going to games and seeing cheerleaders and watching games. But just to finish up with Howie this way, Howie's got a really, really good understanding. One of the things I'm really impressed about with Howie, with Nick Sirianni, they have a great relationship, which I really like. And I say this respectfully to Nick, Howie has never been all about the coach. When you look at, and there are some stats out there, I wish I could pop them off right now, but they've done what they're doing with a different head coach and a different quarterback, right? What is that? You'll find it for me. But the reality is it's really, really important. There's consistency at certain levels. It's not always about this heavy-handed coach that comes in there that runs roughshod over everyone. It's a really good working relationship between the GM, the head coach, and of course the owner. And I do say this, really, really important. Howie has such a good understanding and a belief, and he keeps itself in perspective for him. He'll hire guys like Dave Caldwell. You can say what you want to say about David at Jacksonville. Dave is one of the best talent evaluators in this country, as well as Matt Russell, who he hired from Denver, who was the assistant GM there. He's got the right people around him, which is really, really important, right? You can't do it alone. You have to surround yourself. You have to have enough confidence. And I think Howie does a really good job of saying, let's do this together, boys. We'll reap the benefits of it. And I think that's where I will shed my light on the makeup.
Yeah, that for sure. And I think that we've talked about it numerous times on this show. Like one of the great symbols of a leader is somebody who's willing to delegate because they're confident enough in their own abilities, and they know to make progress in this world, you have to hire and give power to people who will do things that are different than the way you've done them the whole time, and yet you maintain the core integrity of how you're trying to build your program. I think, they were a team. I think of Nick Sirianni. Now, I posted in the chat the Sumer Sports Twitter account, which you should follow if you're interested in any of this stuff. But Nick Sirianni, what I find great about him is, last season he was calling the plays, right? He was a head coach who was a offensive coordinator who didn't call plays, Indianapolis for Frank Reich, a guy we both really like a lot. And he goes to Philly, and I think for a lot of these men, it's like, I want to call plays because I want to prove how brilliant I am at this, right? And it's sort of similar to a GM who's like, I want to stay evaluating even though I'm the decision maker now. And to Sirianni's credit, halfway through last season, he gave his coordinating duties to Shane Steichen, who is now, a head coaching candidate, and he just became the head coach, right? And the guy that makes decisions and everything. And if you look at that Twitter thread that I posted, Nick Sirianni's added almost a win to his team just by doing the right thing on fourth downs, 2-point conversions, not calling timeouts in the wrong place, and not getting delay of games. There was a really good question from Ashley here. Said, are there any stats or analytics that talk about evaluating head coaches? Is there a prominent statistic that makes Kyle Shanahan good? There's actually two questions here, right? Shanahan is actually not necessarily as good at the fourth downs and all that kind of stuff as a guy like Sirianni. Where Shanahan's great is what we call scheme uniqueness. So basically taking a data set and saying, how often do you run 21 personnel? How often do you run inside zone, outside zone? You do like a principal component analysis. You look at how different his play calling data is than the rest. And that's where Shanahan's an outlier, right? Where he's just, and this is why they do so good this time of year, he's just a hard guy to play call against, or, to prepare against. Mm-hmm. And that is something, uniqueness matters in football because the game is a small sample game. And your weeks are short, and you do not, if you can make the other team change completely, like imagine planning for the Dallas Cowboys offense and then having to plan for the San Francisco 49ers offense. Like that are two totally different things. And if you can be that left hand to everybody else's right hand, you can be a prominent figure there. And I think, with Sirianni, he just has leaned into this idea of I'm the CEO coach. And I'm going to be the guy that riles everybody up. I'm going to be an advocate for my players. I'm going to do that kind of stuff. And a lot of times what's really interesting is the analytics in football often will support that approach. Everybody wants to go for fourth downs, right? Your quarterback's an absolute bust on short yardage plays. Then lean into them and put the game in your hands of your players and not your kickers, for the most part. And you will have success. And he's really done that. I look at this team and I think, they don't have the best quarterback in the world, but they surround him with players to make him look the best. And to me, that is a very, very solid mark of who the good coaches are. Do you like, we were talking about Jalen Hurts as if he's an MVP candidate like a month ago. And we all know that he's not like a guy that you would put on the same plane as a Patrick Mahomes. But if you're a coach that can make us all believe that for just even a moment in time, I think you're a good coach.
Well, and I would say this, I experienced it back in 16 or 17 when we came back after, our bad loss in 16. And of course, there's Philly going to the Super Bowl and doing what they did, winning the Super Bowl. And I am confident in saying, I don't think that team could touch the team, and respectfully to the team and the players, I don't think they can touch this team overall, what I think this team is right now. It is a very, very impressive team. I don't know who goes toe-to-toe with them, honestly, down the stretch. It'll be interesting to see how it is. I get it. It'll be fun to watch San Fran and Philly. I get it. But I think they're in a really, really good place right now.
Yeah, if you look ahead betting markets, the Eagles are favored in a potential matchup against both the Bengals and the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. If you were to do that look ahead, that is something to think about. The Niners are actually underdogs against both teams on the look ahead. Just again, that's kind of something just to put in your peer review. Let's talk about the Bengals, because Thomas, this is a team where I know people are, we even saw it today. Brandon Beane in his press conference, I don't know if you caught wind of that, but Brandon Beane said when they were asking him about the edge that the Bengals had, he talked about well, they have Burrow, who is the first overall pick on a rookie deal. You have Jamar Chase, who's a 5th overall pick on a rookie deal. And Beane, I think, deridingly said, hey, I never want to be bad enough to pick 5th. And it's like, well, okay, but they were, and then now they're better than you. They made they made it further than you. I still think if you re-rack Bills Bengals, the Bills would still be favored, but they win over you. And I think the league's starting to find out what kind of edge there is in picking high and hitting on premium positions, like Burrow, like Chase, like Higgins, and what that bounty can be for you. Now, the bill is going to come due for the Bengals. They got to pay Burrow this offseason. Eventually, they're going to have to pay Chase. But for right now, this team is really hard to beat because of the way that they're constructed. And in many ways, I think they overcome some of the differences between them structurally, like front office and all that. They're different than most of these teams that are competing, aren't they?
Very different, and it's a good segue into how the Bengals approach things from just from Coach Brown, who came in there from way back when the Bengals were created. They've always been a very mom and pop group, right? And I say that respectfully enough. They've just been football through and through. They're not flashy, of course, from the most part. Nowadays, they're spending a lot more money than they used to spend, of course. But historically, this will be interesting for everyone. When I was a young scout growing up, right? When I was in my early years, I would go out to schools, right? And all the old boys would say, Thomas, Frank Smouse, he was a scout at time for the Bengals, right? One of the scouts. But they never had a big scouting staff. They used their coaches to go out and scout in the off season. They would keep expenses down. But what happened, most of the personnel people would tell me as a neophyte scout, you can be nice to Frank and whoever else is scouting for him and the coaches, but don't share any information with them. And I'd say, why? They're like, the last thing you want is for an organization that doesn't believe in the bigger development of a scouting staff to reap the benefits and win, because it'll make other owners, this was way back, it'll make other owners believe that that's the way to do it. We were all rolling with, 20-something plus people in the scouting department, right? We had them all over. I'm saying all the teams that I had been with. So my point is, there were a lot of people that were worried about the Bengals thriving in a much smaller approach. And now let's just bring it to today. We have a guy like Duke Tobin. Duke Tobin categorically is one of the best out there, and he should have a GM job. Now, he probably picks not to have a GM job, right? They don't name him necessarily the GM there, right? Is he a VP of player personnel or SVP?
I believe so. Yeah, I think that's his title. He's kind of effectively building the team, but it's not a title that he doesn't have the same title as some of his contemporaries in the league.
But his dad's there. His dad, Bill Tobin, was one of the best through and through best. He comes from great football stock. And again, the Browns are very good people, and they do it the way they want to do it because that's how they wanted to do it. I just think right now, so put that aside, that the things that I learned that many years ago, it's still a fairly small personnel staff, but they know Duke Tobin leads it so well, along with his head coach. Again, same kind of thing. They know the lines. They work together. There's not, and I want to throw it over to you from a coaching standpoint and in your perspective. They don't just go off and go in different directions, right? Duke Tobin understands coaches and football people because he's been around it. Another one, been around it since the day he was born. So he has a really good understanding on how he navigates through the ups and downs of building a football team, along with any coach that he's been with while he's been there, to where they are right now.
No, for sure. And I think one of the benefits that they have in terms of being like, not being as being a spendthrift is sort of like they're loyal, right? Like, Marvin Lewis was there for a long time, and they kind of had two pop-ups with Marvin Lewis. Like early on in the Carson Palmer days, they had the 05 season where they won the division. They had the 09 season when they won the division. And then they kind of had, Carson Palmer didn't want to be there anymore, right? And so then they let him go. They trade him for a few first-round picks, and then they go and they get Andy Dalton and AJ Green in the same draft, your Julio Jones draft. You ended up with Julio. They ended up with AJ Green, and they win, a few years in a row there. And their faith in Marvin Lewis was sort of rewarded, right? And then, when I moved here, I like going to Bengals games. I went to a few Bengals games, and they were down bad, man. And every Uber driver was like, "Oh, this team's horrendous," all this kind of stuff. And yet, then they get Zach Taylor in the building, and the first 2 years, Zach won 6 games, and everybody's like, "Oh, if you were at any other franchise than the Bengals, you would be fired, right? Any other franchise." That was what the media would say. And yet they're like, well, no, we're going to stick with Zach Taylor, right? And now we're talking about Zach Taylor having a chance to go 4-0 against Andy Reid, who's objectively a top 10 coach, if not top 5 coach in NFL history. And there have been games when Zach Taylor gave Andy Reid he ran around Andy Reid. The first game at Paycor last year, he completely out chess matched him. And we think about this in terms of development, like that's a guy that everybody kind of poo-pooed, right? Oh, he had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay once. That's why he's the head coach. Like literally all the tropes that they came out for Zach Taylor were said, and yet you give the guy a great quarterback. And I think, we're all going to watch and look, and Burrow's the main guy there, but Zach Taylor's doing his part. Then you give him a wide receiver. By the way, that team, they did the analytical thing. Like most people in analytics were saying, you got to get a wide receiver to get open in under 2.5 seconds. Don't draft Penei Sewell. Penei Sewell's a fine player. But they were like, get a wide receiver and get open in 2.5 seconds and deal with everything else. Last week, they had 3 offensive linemen injured in the snow, and Burrow just got rid of the ball quickly against one of the best defenses in football, and having Jamar Chase was there. They obviously, picking Burrow, everybody else is going to pick Burrow. That's the thing. But then the rest of the roster construction, in my opinion, was very strategic and very smart. And now they're sitting here and they're slight favorites in this weekend's game in Kansas City against a team that's hosted 5 straight of these AFC title games. This team, is a for real juggernaut kind of championship caliber football team, and they've done it differently than other people have.
And to your point, just to bring it back to Duke Tobin and that group, strategic on how they put things together. And again, everyone is cheering for him now much more because they realize he is a football guy through and through, but has a very broad mind and an open mind to utilize his proper elements of analytics and the approach. Not saying that they're out there spending a ton of money on it, but he understands it. He's a Boulder guy, right? He went to the University of Colorado. Again, he has. I don't want to keep harping on him because I think it's the relationship that, again, he has with his head coach, to your point about Zach, and the way that they treat and approach the building of the entire roster together. And again, quite honestly, they also are smart about how they use their coaches in the scouting and the evaluation side, which is vital in this world. You can't be at a separate end of the spectrum, right? You have to be working with your personnel staff and your coaching staff, which I believe the Bengals do a really good job with.
Yeah, and they hired Sam Francis a couple of years ago as their analytics person. They were a very, like, when I started at PFF, you're talking about like they had maybe like one or two developers on their whole, like, computer programmers on the whole staff. They hire Sam, and you can kind of see that he's informing Zach on the sideline during the games, and like you're talking about a person who's very thoughtful about the game, who's researched the game really well. And Zach Taylor, to his credit, to what you just talked about a few minutes ago with respect to front offices, as a coach, he's somebody who's doing a good thing. He's not necessarily brilliant in any aspect of the game, but he's delegating and obviously leaning on a great quarterback, and that team picks up dollar bills on the ground during the games, whether it be clock management, whether it be fourth down decisions, those kind of things. And that is a very, big deal. And that's why they're here. And that's why, as a Kansas City Chiefs fan, I am not at all. I was unnervous last year when they played the Bengals in the AFC title game. And boy, was I surprised when I had to leave that field after they won. I would not be in the slightest surprise if they won Sunday. They are a worthy foe to the Chiefs, who we're going to talk about here. This team, again, a very, like, we're talking about a team that there has not been a ton of adversity, right? Like Andy Reid, your friend Scott Pioli was the general manager, took the team to the playoffs in 2010, won a division. Didn't quite work out that way. They chose a quarterback in Matt Castle who wasn't everything he was thought to be. And so he gave way. Pioli and Todd Haley, Romeo Crennel gave way to Andy Reid in 2013, and also John Dorsey. And from there, I mean, Andy Reid won his first 9 games as a Chief, and it really hasn't looked back since. And that I think as the Dorsey years went on, they built a great roster. Justin Houston, Tamba Hali, Jamal Charles was there for a while. Then it was Jeremy Maclin at wide receiver, and then it was Chris Jones, and it was they built like sort of the rock. They drafted Tyreek Hill in round 5, but they were always kind of an arm's length away from the Super Bowl, right? They got a 2 seed one year. They lost to Pittsburgh after the bye, and you're just kind of like, this team with Alex Smith, who's a great story, great guy, great human being, is not going to get over the hump, right? And so, Brett Veach scouted Patrick Mahomes. Andy Reid really loved him. They really made that move very similar to the one you made for Julio Jones when you were trying, year after year after year to try to get over the hump. They said, okay, we're going to, and I was actually on the radio talking to my buddy Saran Petro. I'm like, look, they should get Patrick Mahomes. And this is when I thought he was a bottom half of the first round guy. And they're like, well, what if you have to get to 10? Which was prophetic, because they had to trade the 27th pick that year. They had to trade a 3rd round pick that year. And they had to trade the next year's one to go up to 10 and get Patrick Mahomes. And for, they've hosted every single AFC championship game since then. So, what can you say about that sort of move, where, because you've been in that chair, you've made that move before for a wide receiver, but somebody who's a Hall of Famer, you've made that move for a Hall of Famer before. What can you say about like that, the boldness it takes to go up and get a player like that and to really change the complexion of your franchise?
Look, I think I mentioned it before. I mean, it starts with ownership. I mean, I love their ownership. I love their approach. I mean, through and through. We talk about, Andy being there as the elder statesman and a little bit of the fatherly figure to the general manager, who get along really well. Let me just say quickly, back to giving your team major kudos. They've had some really, really good football men come through there. I'm talking about Scott Pioli. I'm talking about John Dorsey. Those people are good football people. They know the league. They know their world. It may not have worked out for them the way that we wanted it to, of course, but this comes back to me, starts with ownership. And we can talk about that for a while. I know I've mentioned before about the trifecta with an owner and for Brett Veach, an owner and a quarterback and an owner, a quarterback, and a general manager, a head coach. That whole group together is really, really big, of course, and important how you're, to build. And I remember spending more and more time when I was spending time with Brett Veach and talking to Andy Reid about their relationship. Andy had such respect in a young guy like Brett Veach to do what he needed to do and build it and provide the way that he needed to provide. I can't speak. It's one of the coveted organizations out there for most of us that have background as general managers or as team builders, and any of you rising executives. study the Kansas City Chiefs and how they do things. You don't always just have to take it from my buddy here on the left side of the screen or right side of the screen. I mean, Eric's going to have a strong feeling, but he's right. This is a really good franchise and really well built. And when you can get an HC and a GM who work in consort and understand the direction, they both have their opinions, of course. But the great thing I've seen is here's Andy taking a guy that's that many years his junior and trusting the heck out of him. That is a big thing. It's not about butting heads on egos, and that can happen very often in our league. So I don't want to go off too much here, but I'm just so impressed with how they approach it from just a building and a management standpoint. And again, it starts with the owner.
Well, I think that, you're my boss, right? You know this from but there's an aspect that I contrast this a little bit with Kyle Shanahan with Andy Reid. I think Kyle Shanahan is such a genius that, and there are some geniuses that really like when you think about quarterbacks, they like the guy that paints within the lines, right? That draws within the lines, right? And because they're tracing out the best picture ever. That's who I think Kyle Shanahan is. And I think that there's tons of value evidently in that because they're continuing to be successful. When I look at Andy Reid, I think of somebody who, you were Brett Favre's quarterback coach, and Brett Favre was not coloring Brett Favre's an artist, right? And so to mentor an artist is going to be a lot harder than in some ways than to mentor somebody who, colors between the lines really well. And then Patrick Mahomes is like the quintessential, Brett Favre, clone from 20 years later. And so there's so much, in my opinion, I think value to what Andy's done to get him in the fold. But then, and this is where he tugs at my heartstrings a little bit, the mentorship, right? When you look at all the people that Andy Reid has coached, Sean McDermott to a head coaching position, Doug Peterson to a head coaching position, Matt Nagy to a head coaching position, and then back when he fails in Chicago. There's so much. Andy does a great job of promoting his own. Eric Bieniemy is a finalist for this Colts job. I just love that aspect of it. And then I'll close with this because I know, I actually from the Sumer Sports account, somebody said, the analytical models don't fully factor in Burrow's clutch gene. And then we have C-Dub who says there's no such thing as a clutch gene. So we're having a little bit battle there. And of course, we said at Sumer Sports, clutch gene is Thomas gutting out this show from Jamaica. So we're gonna, we're having a little bit of fun here in the comments. But to close this, I really want to commend the Chiefs for showing the league the two phases of being a dynasty. The first phase is to get the quarterback on a rookie deal. This is the part that the Bengals are in. You get the quarterback on a rookie deal. The Chiefs signed Sammy Watkins to a big deal. They kept Tyreek Hill. They kept Travis Hill. They get Mitchell Schwartz into the fold to be a great right tackle. They build the foundation around Mahomes, right? You get one Super Bowl during that 4-year window. Now, if you're a Bengals or Chargers fan with Burrow and Herbert coming up for deals this year, you're a little disappointed unless the Bengals can get home this year. And then when that window closes, when Mahomes starts making the $46 million a year, now you have to throttle back, right? And you trade Tyreek Hill to the Dolphins. You spread it out. You sign 4 wide receivers to do the job of 1. And I think, and we're going to talk about this Monday when we talk about wide receivers, but they did such a good job of transitioning from going all in with the quarterbacks on a rookie deal and trying to win when he's cheap. Boom, boom, boom. 2 Super Bowl appearances, 1 win. And then this year was really fun because they pulled back and they said, look, we're going to let the Bills sign Von Miller. We're going to let the Chargers spend $1 billion to try to knock us off. And they trusted their quarterback. They trusted their head coach. They trusted their general manager. General manager trusted himself. And ultimately, what you see here is 14-2 or 14-3, and a chance to host another, AFC title game, which, just as a fan of the game, even I find very cool, and I find very a teaching moment for everybody.
It's great. I love it. Love it. I don't know where to go with it from there. But
yeah, we've already gone a little bit longer than we wanted to. I know you got to go get some food. I know both of us are a little bit hungry. So. I think this was great. By the way, just looking at the Chiefs Bengals is about a pick 'em. Phillies favored by about 2.5 against the Niners. In case you wanted to know those things, the most likely outcome is is going to be interesting. I think this is the first time since 1997, Thomas, that both AFC and NFC title games had a point spread under 3. And that was, to take this all the way back. This was Kyle Shanahan's dad, Mike Shanahan, in Pittsburgh against Bill Cowher. And then the Mike Holmgren Green Bay Packers on the road against Steve Mariucci's San Francisco 49ers. That was the last time we've had conference title games predicted to be this close. So we're in for a great weekend. I'm really glad that we got to preview it the Sumer way, right? Every other show's doing everything else. We're going to preview it our own way. So we really appreciate you all for coming. Please smash the like button on your way out. We really appreciate you all for coming and being a part of this. Follow us on Twitter at Sumer Sports. And of course, if you're not already, become a subscriber to the Sumer Sports YouTube. So for Thomas Dimitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been episode 24 of the Sumer Sports Show.